So I'll get started just while Jen does that, because obviously Martin's cutting us short. So I'm here just to give a very quick introduction to us, Little Man Project. So I think probably most people know who we are, but for those of you who don't, I'm Jill Chester, and I run an e-learning company called Little Man Project, and I work with Jen. Just kind of what do we do? Well, we kind of fit in, you know, we've just heard a session from the content library providers. Obviously you get a wealth of great, amazing content as part of your members package. We're here for when you need something that's specific to your organization. So something that you can't resolve from the library. So that might be something that's kind of specifically around a process or policy that you do, that's kind of, you know, slightly different, but also around the work that you do. And one of the big areas of our work is supporting organizations who want to develop content to sell on to external organizations. So that might be around a specific area that they're experts in, or it might just be where there's again, they've been asked by, you know, we've had people say, well, you know, we've been asked by a hospital to support them in a particular area. We've got the expertise. Can you help us build the e-learning to support them? So yeah, that's kind of where we are and what we do. Jen, can you? Thank you. Okay, so as you'll have seen from the agenda, Jen's going to be talking to you about the practical tips for enhancing accessibility in e-learning. What we're doing is we're running this session as part of our eLearning Unlocked program. So big shout out to Shanice. Absolutely loved your talk. And thank you for mentioning eLearning Unlocked in your session. So eLearning Unlocked is a 12-month blended learning program. And so what we're doing is working with, can you change the slide, Jen? What we're doing is working with, again, the talks that we're running at all of the different members meetings, so that we're supporting any delegates who are doing the eLearning Unlocked program with content around the topic that we're in. So at the moment we're working, we've just moved on to quality assurance, but we have been working around accessibility and inclusion, and that's where this talk fits in. So I'm going to hand over to Jen. I'm going to be in the chat kind of supporting in there. But yeah, thank you, Jen.
Thank you so much, Jill. So the reason why I'm talking on this one is because basically I lead on the accessibility at Little Man Project, but all of us within the team do work within this area in varying degrees. I'm really sorry, Martin, I do have slides for this talk. I know you mentioned it a couple of times, so I hope you won't be too disappointed. It is needed because obviously it's quite a visual thing and just to explore the topics. So
it's all right. It's all right. It's all right.
Thanks, Martin, thanks. So first of all, I just wanted to see kind of vibe, how everyone feels about applying accessibility in their e-learning. So if you could add to your emoji reactions, I'd love that. I'd just love to know how you feel about it. Doesn't matter whether you started applying it or not in your e-learning yet. Yeah, just let me know. Okay, some hearts, nice. Okay, cool. So generally, when we do training in this area, people can be quite apprehensive, and that's completely normal. There's a hell of a lot of information, and it can feel like there's a lot riding on this area. So the purpose of this is just to really give you the top things that you can do right now to make your e-learning accessible. So what is accessibility? Accessibility in e-learning is basically about making sure that all learners, regardless of their physical, sensory or cognitive abilities, can fully participate and achieve their learning goals. There's been a new recent study which has actually found the number of people who have a disability or a health condition that limits their major life activity as 25%. So the statistic previously was thought to be much lower, but actually it is 25%. But also this statistic doesn't even include people that didn't disclose that they had a disability. So actually the statistic is much higher. Why is accessibility important? Obviously, you guys are all, leading in your areas. I'm sure that most of you already know a lot of these. Ultimately, there's a hell of a lot of benefits to making your e-learning accessible. Some, though, are more obvious than others. So the legal and moral responsibility. But some of the ones that people don't necessarily think of sometimes is ultimately you can extend your reach and reach more learners that you might not be reaching already. It's more enjoyable for learners, so they're more engaged. It can enhance your reputation as a learning provider, particularly if you're selling your learning to increase your income, because you're creating high quality, sustainable learning resources. And also, obviously, it can increase the impact because the content is delivering the intended knowledge and skills to everyone. I'm going to just touch a tiny bit on legislation. I think most of us know about the legislation. So there's the UK legislation, the top ones being the Equality Act and the public sector bodies accessibility regulations in the UK. And both of those are really pitched more towards public sector bodies, stating that they must make their websites and mobile apps accessible to all learners. And then on the other side, we've got the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And that's not just about providing access, that's about promoting that access for people with disabilities. But the reason why I wanted to touch on this one, in case you don't know, is there's a new act that's coming soon, which is the European Accessibility Act. We don't know exactly what's going to be in there yet, but it is going to be a requirement for anyone operating in the EU, but it will also influence countries that aren't in the EU in terms of their practice. And the most important thing, and why I've added this in, is that the inside scoop on it is for the first time, the legislation is potentially going to have hefty fines involved with it, and potentially even, not to try and scare anyone, but maybe even prison sentences. So essentially the legislation is aligning itself more with GDPR than any of the legislation we've had before. So it's quite an important one to watch. So you may know, but there's no formal guidance on accessibility in e-learning right now. So what we do is we use the closest best thing, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, also known as WCAG, to apply that content to our e-learning. Just going to do a really quick recap on that. So apologies if you know this already. There are 4 main key principles within WCAG. It's perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So in order for your e-learning or learning content to be accessible, it needs to achieve all of those aspects. So perceivable, the learning needs to be available to all of the senses. So if someone has a visual impairment, there must be an alternative that they can receive or perceive that content. So operable, the user interface components and navigation must be able to be operable. And so that means by everyone. So if someone can't use a mouse, for example, then there needs to be an alternative that they can use. So a different form of assistive technology. The content needs to be understandable. So that is to do with the text itself and like the information within it, the learning, but also the navigation and how you use the interface, how you navigate through it. You need to be able to make sense of it. Otherwise, the learner's going to get stuck and it's going to be very confusing. Robust is the last one. So that means that it needs to work with different browsers and assistive tech, but also it needs to be pretty foolproof in terms of testing, that ultimately you try to break it and test it in different ways with different technology, again, so that all learners can use it. Going on a little bit, so WCAG has those 4 principles, and one of the ways that we can apply those guidelines is through these 4 key profiles, which is what WCAG identified. Now, it doesn't mean when you're doing your e-learning or you're creating any e-learning, you think, okay, right, yes, I've ticked the box. Someone has a visual impairment. I've done that, right? Okay, someone has an auditory impairment. I've done that. You need to think of all of these things together, which is actually quite hard. But at least if you look at them individually, you know that you've kind of covered the bases, and then you can look at some of the more tricky screens or tricky types of interactions in a more in-depth way. But actually, there's lots of things you can do at a very high level to make the learning accessible for these people. So visual is people who, these profiles, visual is people who are blind. They have some sort of vision loss or colour vision deficiency. Auditory relates to having a partial or total inability to hear. Motor impairments could be a partial or total loss of a body part. So it could be that someone has difficulty using a mouse. And then finally, cognitive can involve challenges with memory, thinking, or processing information. So it can be difficult for learners to absorb and engage with content. And that could include like following complex instructions, retaining information, or even managing multiple tasks. That was my little intro, so we're going to just jump into it now. So these are the top things that we can do to make our e-learning accessible. Now, some of them, like colour contrast or text, are people might be more familiar with, but they're in terms of audits that organisations are doing right now. So when we're doing audits on e-learning from charities, and there's other learning providers who are doing it as well, these are still the top things that all organisations are falling down on in terms of that they're not applying them. So my question is there anything that you want to explore first, or shall I just crack on through? Feel free to shout out or add them in the chat. Anyone?
Keyboard.
Okay, keyboard, lovely. Okay. So keyboard navigation helps learners who are unable to use a mouse because they will need to use some sort of other alternative. And in this instance, they'll be using the keys on the keyboard. So that will either be using the tabbing key or using the arrow keys, or it can be other keys, other shortcuts that they've set up themselves based on their own unique needs. And what happens when you navigate using a keyboard is it basically ensures that all of the content in the e-learning is visited and that nothing is missed. So the most important thing when you're applying keyboard navigation and you're checking it is that it follows the logical sequence. So if I didn't use assistive technology and I could see the content, the order in which I would be navigating through, and I'll show you an example of that in a second. Interactive elements as well need to be accessed and operated. So if there's any media, videos, links to downloads, you should be able to access them via your keyboard and not have to use your mouse. And you need to ensure that any content is not skipped as well, which is a big one that can happen. For learners using keyboard navigation and screen readers, which we'll cover in a minute, the focus order is essential so that they can complete content. So I just touched on the fact it needs to be in the right order. And in the UK, this is basically exploring the content from the top to the bottom and going from left to right. So essentially, it's how you read, how we read in the UK a book, whereas in other countries, potentially, you would set it up differently. So in this screenshot, if the person was navigating using a keyboard or a screen reader, we would want to set up all of the objects in this order. So they would start with number 1, which would be the title. They would then go to the instruction text at the bottom, number 2, which tells them what they should be doing. So click on each of the images. They then go to 3, 4, 5, and 6, which are the clickable parts of the interaction. After that, and only after that, would they be going to the bottom navigation elements. So once they click on all of those elements in a click to reveal, the next would become available so they could go forwards. And after that, the keyboard navigation would follow, would visit the back button, the progress, the menu, the glossary, the help, and the exit. And the reason that that's important is that otherwise those repetitive elements are read to the learner every single time, or they have to click through them using their keyboard, which means essentially in this instance, they would have an extra 6 steps or 6 or 7 steps to do before reaching the next button. So it's just unnecessary. Within the focus order, which I will go into in a moment, we do need to decide what elements we want to leave in and what elements we want to leave out. But all of the things you can do within the focus order makes it less likely that learners using keyboard navigation will get stuck, and it makes the content more understandable, essentially. So back, someone shout out another one.
Liz asked for alt text.
Alt text, excellent, thank you, Jill. I can't see, so that's really helpful, thank you. So anyone who doesn't know, alt text is a brief description of any visual content to make it accessible to people who are blind or visually impaired. As screen readers, read the alt text aloud. So any of those visual content, so whether it's a video, an image, would have a description which would be read out. But it's actually also really helpful for people with cognitive impairments to support their understanding. For example, if you had a diagram on screen, you could add alt text that explains what that diagram is saying, and it basically supports their learning. So alt text is required for any element that's not decorative. So you do need to decide whether to add it or not. So if you had a text and image screen in eLearning and there was essentially just a detailed spotty background, you might decide, actually, I'm going to remove that because if someone was using some assistive technology like a screen reader, it would get read to them potentially as .png, spotty background, etc. And it just becomes very overwhelming. So sometimes with alt text, we decide to take things out. These are my top tips in terms of alt text. So you need to be descriptive and you need to be specific. You need to ask if it's necessary. So that just goes back to what I just said. Should it be in or should it be removed from the focus order and not have alt text at all? You need to make sure it uses plain English and isn't over the top or too wordy. You need to check for typos because they will be read to the learner, which can cause confusion. If you have a diagram which has text in it, say, for example, or even just an image, say this character is holding a sign that says alt text, then you would need to also include that text in the alt text so that they know, so that they have the full information about that image. And my last one, which is something that people don't always think about, is the inclusivity of that alt text. So one of the things that I often find when I'm doing audits on eLearning is when people describe an image in a non-inclusive way. So a classic one is that I often correct alt text where women are described as ladies. So you could have a lady on a phone. You know, that's not the right language that we need to be using. So you need to make sure that you're correcting that language as well. So I've got a little tiny quiz for you here. And I just wondered if anyone would like to have a go at coming up with some alt text for this image.
You pop it in the chat, I can read that out, or you can unmic yourself. Group of people holding up letter spelling panel. 5 people each holding a sign on a card above them, the letter spell panel.
That's really good. Really good attempt. Really, really good attempt.
Diverse,
so,
someone's edited a diverse panel.
That's great. Even better, even better. So when we come up with the alt text for this, the text that we came up with was a diverse group of 6 illustrated people, including a person in a wheelchair and a child, holding up signs that together spell the word panel. So you can see there's obviously quite a bit of detail. The text within the cards has been included in, because that's actually a key message that was needed within the e-learning. So you guys did actually great at that, so well done. If you struggle with alt text, there's actually loads of new tools which have come out, which are AI text generators for specifically alt text. Loads of them are free. Jill, if you can pop the one that I've used into the chat, that'd be super helpful. Otherwise, I can send it to Amber after this. But I definitely recommend using those. Sometimes if you're stuck, it can really help you. What would people like to do next?
Colour. We've had a big shout out for colour.
Colour, lush. Okay. So colour contrast refers to the difference in the luminescence or the colour that makes text or an object distinct from others. So we tend to think of colour contrast more in terms of, okay, is the text readable on a button? But actually the guidance goes much further than that. It's actually also about, are the buttons visible or perceivable on the background as well? So you do actually need to think about all the colours that you're using within the e-learning. The only way to know that colours are accessible is to use a colour contrast checker. It's really easy to think, oh, well, actually that doesn't look, that looks right to me, I think that'll do. It absolutely doesn't do. And even me myself, I have looked at colours before and thought, yeah, I think that's okay, and it's not been. So we use an online tool to check the colour combinations, and the most common, most popular one is WebAIM. And this is an output of WebAIM. Essentially on the left here, the colours have been inputted in terms of their codes, and it has pushed out the results of those colour combos, whether it failed or not. And then on the right hand side, you've got a colour grid, which is a number of different colours and whether the colour combinations work together or not, essentially. So I'm going to just move on here and just again ask
Can I
you
just
to
pick up on that point,
yeah,
Jen?
sorry, Joel.
So in terms of that grid, it's a really good idea to go in and get all of your brand colours into that, so that you can really start to see what fits together. So, you know, if I'm using you know, I don't know, an orange colour on a click to reveal, what colours do I have to use on top of it? And so you can use that then as your benchmark as you go through. Sorry, Jen.
Yeah. And Graham, I see you've made a comment in the chat which says this is sometimes obstructed by the comms department that have strict colour preferences. It absolutely is. And we've been working with some really big charities who are using combinations of colour that are not accessible. I do genuinely believe that we're going to be moving away from that, because I think when you actually have the argument, you know, that's based in the legal compliance now that they're not accessible, we are definitely having more movement on that. So the last charity that we worked with where we challenged that, they ended up using different colours or different combinations for their e-learning. So that is a really good point. You can put together a business case for that. And Susie Miller, who I'm going to mention a bit, she has put together business comms and marketing to kind of challenge that. So if you have that issue, then potentially, you know, we could give you some supporting information on that. So which of these colours combinations are accessible? If you could just pop your answers into the chat, that'd be great. Option 2 is the winner at the moment. Anyone else? 2, 2, 2, and
Does
1.
anyone think 1 and 3 are?
All. There's someone, a couple of people for 1. One person said all. A few for 3. Great. So there's a good mix there. And I think that just kind of reinforces the reality that actually we all, so that reinforces the reality that, you know, we all are seeing colour differently. Graham, you've just asked the question in the chat, accessible to whom? Theoretically accessible based on the ranges, so accessible to the most people, ideally. There are, people do use their own assistive technology to potentially, you know, change the colours for their own specific needs. So I had a really good meeting recently with a charity who were interested in stuff that was specific to people who are neurodiverse and also people who are dyslexic. In reality, people all have their own preferences. So what we're talking about here is making them accessible for people with visual impairments, for disabilities, but there's obviously a whole rabbit hole of other considerations that can be looked at, which I'm happy to talk about another time. So there was a real mix there. In actual fact, and these are the answers, option 1 only passes if the text that's used is large. So if you were using that on body text in an e-learning module, you couldn't, it would fail. Option 2 passes for every single colour and every size of font and combination. But option 3 fails with these colours at every size and every combination. So even if you had it massive, it would not pass. So again, just going back to the fact that it's really important to use the screen reader. Sorry, WebAIM to confirm. Sorry, this is on a awry somehow. Apologies. What next, everyone?
Media.
Media. Excellent. Okay. So it's essential that all media used in e-learning can be accessed and operated by all learners, and all of these alternatives help them to do this. So subtitles are used to provide a text version of the spoken dialogue. I think we're all more familiar with that because you know, when we're watching Netflix and stuff like that, you know, if someone's got a strong accent or they're speaking a different language, sometimes potentially you'd be using subtitles. There is an overlap with closed captions because closed captions are often used interchangeably, so closed captions also cover spoken dialogue, but they also cover sound effects and music cues as well. So if there is anything else that's going on, a phone rings, the TV's making a noise, then that would be described within the closed captions. And these are designed for learners who are deaf or hard of hearing to make sure that any learning isn't missed. So classic one in e-learning is when you've got a talking head video and you've got lots of different people talking. The closed caption could potentially tell them that it's switching to a different person talking, or if someone laughs, or some of the other cues. Then we have here audio descriptions. So audio descriptions are voiced narration about the visual elements in video or animation content. So an example here is John enters the room, he looks angry. So you would only know how John looked if it was visually described to you. So that's really, really useful. And then finally here, I've got transcripts, which tend to be used by individuals with hearing impairments, but they can also be a great alternative for people with cognitive impairments or differences, such as neurodiverse people. And the benefit of them is that people can download them and digest them at their own pace. So one of the things that I haven't really gone into detail on is the different levels of accessibility. But essentially, if you're meeting the middle level, which is called AA, then you would need to be having subtitles or closed captions and audio descriptions on all of your videos. If you are meeting AAA, then potentially you'd be adding transcripts as well. What's next?
I'm really sorry, Jen, we're out of time.
No way.
Right. So.
Okay.
Wow.
See, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Jen, let me jump in.
Go for it,
I don't think you need to go around each one. What you've done is you've given people a flavour that, because this is a much bigger topic than a half an hour quick webinar. So there's a couple of things. If organisations are building their own content and they want help, you can support them.
Yes, absolutely.
If organisations are building their own content, they can sign up for the eLearning Unlocked program. So
Yep.
this is an element really that comes out of the eLearning Unlocked program. And I don't want to turn this into a sales pitch. This is more a pitch to you can help. And are you going to be running another eLearning Unlocked program next year?
Yes, we absolutely are. And it's going to be starting in January. People can start signing up in the next couple of months. We're going to be launching imminently, really.
I've put a link to where you can
Thank you,
register
Jill.
your interest. So not register, but if you are interested when we do launch and want a direct link to that, then
Brilliant.
but the website's got all the information. But there's also that link just to sign up your interest.
Thank you. I think the main thing here is that obviously this is an introduction to some of the basic things. There's lots more information. We are a provider that can help you, but actually there's loads of other providers for charities that are free. So LinkedIn, I will, in fact, after this, the last few slides just cover a few free things that you can do right now in terms of blogs that you need to be following, people that you need to be following, and options for further training and support. So I will pass it on to Amber to pass it on to you.
Digital goodie bag, yeah.
And it'll go in the digital goodie bag. And again, just want I put it in the chat, but we've been working with Little Man Project for I say 10 years. It's at least 10 years, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we're only a mile away down the road, and we're working more and more closely as time goes on. And it's Jill and the team who are creating the SCORM versions of all of our animated content and the actual little books of the essentials that we're doing. And it's just from members to know that it's a resource that is there that we endorse, if I can say that. And the great thing about working with Little Man Project is 80% of their work is within the charity space. They know how charities work, and most importantly is they know how charities have limited funds compared to the corporate space. And so even if it's just a little bit of help, you've got a team but you're lacking somebody to maybe create storyboards or voiceovers or graphics, or even just as a QA sounding board, then there's all sorts of ways that you can work, that it's not going to cost an absolute fortune, right through to if you want them to create complete product for you, you can. Again, it's not going to be the same sort of rates that you'd be paying the commercial organizations. And I just think it's really important, one, from us to say they're an organization that we work really close with, but also I'm on a little bit of a mission, if you like, in terms of how can we get more traction, and how can we work even more closely with Little Man Project. So any projects that you've got coming up, then either come to us at CLC or just go direct to Jill and Jen. That's it. That was a sales pitch.
Thank you, Martin.
I didn't mean it to sound like a sales pitch, but we work really closely together. We complement each other, and it would be great to get some juicy projects. So if anybody's actually having initial discussions around creating content, then come and talk to us.